All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning in the UK, good afternoon or evening in China, and good day everywhere else in between. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning. This morning's session is on responsible and effective supply chains in China, and we're delighted to have Carmel Giblin and Walter Lin from Sedex. So just to begin, we're going to start with a little bit of an introduction of the CBBC. The China-Britain Business Council is the leading organisation helping UK companies grow and develop their business with China. CBBC supports British companies of all sizes and at every stage of market entry with practical in-market assistance, services, industry initiatives, as well as a membership programme offering access, seminars and significant networking. CBBC works closely with UKTI and the FCO and has a strategic partnership with the British Chamber of Commerce in Beijing, providing corporate memberships with reciprocal membership in Beijing. Our business-led board and professional team have the extensive first-hand experience of doing business in China. And through 57 years of engagement, CBBC has built up exceptional connections with government and business across China. CBBC services are delivered through a network of 11 offices in the UK and 13 strategic locations across China. CBBC helps companies to network and learn from China-savvy multinationals and SMEs to understand the intricacies of doing business in China and to develop sound strategies for expanding in the fast-changing and dynamic marketplace that is modern China. So just to move along, you can see a little bit of our coverage as an organization. We're very pleased to say that we now have offices in Changsha and in Xi'an. So they've recently been opened. So CBBC is proud to continue to move west as the government has asked us all to do. So that's good news from our perspective, and hopefully good news for your perspective doing business in and with China. So, on to this morning's webinar. You should all have this little tool in front of you, and this little tool will allow you to engage. So basically, if you have any questions, please type them in. Everybody is on mute except the presenters because that would make it a little bit difficult to manage. But we will take questions live. If your question is pertinent to what we're talking about, we will drop it in as we speak. If not, we'll get to it at the Q&A at the end. Or if we don't get it, I'll pass it on to our presenters, and our presenters will be happy to follow up with any issue that you have. If I could ask you, please, to raise your hand. So if you see this little, what I'm shining on now, this little red blob, if you could click on the button that says raise your hand, and that will just tell me that you can hear what I'm saying. Excellent. If you could raise your hand, please. Could everybody raise their hand? Click on that little button that says raise your hand. I'll give you one more chance. Almost everybody. Okay, great. So that means that people are able to at least hear what we're saying and people can see what we're doing. As I said, if you have any questions, please type them in to the box that I am highlighting in red here. Thanks very much. Okay, let's continue. So, moving on to our speakers. Our first speaker, Carmel Giblin, is the CEO of Sedex and has been with the organization since April 2010. Sedex engages with all tiers of the supply chain with the aim of driving improvements and convergence in responsible business practices. Before joining Sedex, Carmel was head of corporate responsibility and accessibility at the UK's largest digital broadcaster, Sky. Here she developed their responsibility strategy, part of Sky's Bigger Picture programme. Prior to Sky, Carmel worked across many sectors in a variety of roles, including those of buyer at retailer Summerfield, Waitrose and ExxonMobil, and in supplier organisations including Britvic Soft Drinks and Allied Domech, in roles that included customer management, risk management, and organizational design and effectiveness reviews. So we're very pleased to have Carmel with us this morning. She is sitting here in the London office, which is where I am. The good news is that on the ground in China, we have Walter Lin. Walter Lin is the China Operations Manager with Sedex. Walter has worked with Sedex since December 2007. His role covers IT support, customer service, membership development, and communication, marketing and external stakeholder engagement. Before joining Sedex, Walter worked in the automotive industry for several years, widely dealing with global suppliers and customers on the supply chain functions which improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the supply chain and suppliers' performance. He also spent 6 months in a supplier's factory to work with the factory on a supply chain optimization project and identify key ethical issues. Walter has also worked in an international sourcing office for a French retailer and in a supply chain improvement function. So these are our two speakers this morning. We're delighted to have them on board. So this is quite an interactive platform. We will take your questions and we will be dropping polls in occasionally. So just to test that, I would like to drop our first poll in. I always ask this one. So the first question I'd like to ask is quite a simple one, is where are you? So hopefully on your page now there should be a poll appearing. If you could click on where exactly you are. Terrific. We're nearly there. Anybody else? I can see who's voted and who hasn't. Give it another couple of seconds. Terrific. So let's close that poll. And just so everybody in the group can see, I'll share this with you. So as you can see, we've got quite an interesting and diverse group today. 27% London, 30% UK outside of London, 15% China, and 27% other. I'm very curious to know where all you other people are from. That's a new one for us. So thanks for joining this morning, all you other people. Okay, that's all from me. I'd like to hand over to Carmel, who will present on behalf of Sedex.
Great, thank you, David, for organising today's webinar, and thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar remotely. It's great to have so many of you participating today. Sedex is really pleased to have a really effective relationship with CBBC. We've been working together since 2007. And it was a critical partnership that enabled Sedex to really establish its operations in mainland China. So great to have that continuing relationship with these guys. David's already introduced me. I'm the CEO of Sedex, based here in London. I'll talk a little bit more about the organisation as we go through the presentation, but obviously the main focus is really helping people understand the issues, challenges and opportunities in sourcing from China. My colleague will also join. I'll hand the presentation over a little later on to my colleague Walter, who is based, as David says, in Shanghai. So moving on to slide number 2, which I'll just take you through the agenda very quickly. Over the next 30-40 minutes or so, I'll go through this agenda. So looking at what is responsible sourcing, giving you a brief introduction to Sedex as an organisation, and then we'll look at the common issues and challenges in China. Moving on to how we actually overcome those issues, and Walter will talk us through some of the emerging trends, also looking at the issues, and I'll wrap up with some concluding remarks. As David's already shown, we're also going to have some surveys throughout the presentation, which will help ensure that we are managing the presentation to give you really the audience the most appropriate slant on today's talk. So and like I say, the objective of today really is to provide an overview of some of the issues, challenges and opportunities of sourcing from China. So actually, David, I'd like you to do another survey for me at this particular moment.
That's no problem. The first in-session poll, does your organization have a responsible, sustainable sourcing program? So let's launch that and see what people say. So please feel free to tick whichever is most relevant to you. This enables us to know, what your needs are, what type of people we have on board, and where you are in the whole supply chain space, and will help Carmel and Walter kind of make their speeches more relevant to what your needs are. We'll just give it a couple more seconds, so please click on what is right for you. All right, I think that's fine. So just so everybody knows, I'll share that with the group.
So it seems that we've got a fair mix, really. I think it's about 50% of you saying that you actually have well-established programs, which is great and really encouraging. And I think the rest of it is split against some saying, yes, it's early days, about 18%, and 15% saying, no, we haven't really started yet. So I think that's a really great mix. And as David said, as we're going through this, if anyone's got any questions, please send them through, because that's part of the benefit of having so many people online, that we can cover off many different aspects and understand different people's perspectives on this area. So moving on to the next slide, what is responsible sourcing? Well, really, it means that companies consider their purchasing decisions more broadly than just, say, quality, price, and availability of product. They look to ensure that they are not enabling or facilitating, knowingly or unknowingly, situations such as those described in this slide. So issues of child labour, issues of forced labour, poor wages, corruption, health and safety infringements. These are issues that are often seen in supply chains. If we look at some statistics, 12.3 million people globally are forced to work. Every day, 6,000 people around the world die from a work-related accident or disease. And 218 million children work globally to support their families. 3 billion of the world's poor live on less than $2 a day. These are all issues that are challenging but can be addressed, and that's what we hope to go through today. So why should companies bother at all? Because the issues that are created by not considering your purchasing decisions more widely can significantly impact your company's bottom line and damage its reputation significantly. I'll go through some of these icons in the slide in more detail as we go through the presentation, but they look at the impact on your reputation, product recalls, employee retention and training, government legislation, investors' oversight. All of these are factors in why it's important for companies to consider the ethics of their supply chain. So looking at some of those issues in more detail, if we look at brand value specifically, today everyone is more aware, even subconsciously. So we have films now. If you look at on this screen, we have WALL-E and Avatar, two recent films that have come out. WALL-E very much talked about recycling. The whole world was a rubbish dump, and he was one of the machines that was sent to clean up. In Avatar, it touches on mining and the rights of indigenous people. So entertainment brings some of these issues very much to the forefront of everyone's thinking. Also, if we look at the issues around, say, Apple and Foxconn factories, social media is allowing greater transparency and communication of issues at supply sites to a far greater extent than ever before. What that means is companies are no longer in control of how their brand messaging and communications are distributed amongst the wider consumers globally. Many people now have smartphones, they can take videos, they can interact, and that's a real concern for companies. And obviously the media actively searches out stories. So this example of someone's T-shirt, Blood, Sweat and T-shirts, was a program that the BBC, the UK broadcaster, did back in 2011-12. So the media focus on these stories is very high and will certainly continue. If we move on and look at the impact of employees for companies, numerous studies have now shown us that people want to work for companies who behave responsibly and value both their people and the planet that we all occupy. Staff attraction and retention builds better business. It's a very simple scenario. If you have a lot of staff turnover, if you have a high churn in your employees, that impacts product continuity. It impacts product quality. If you keep a steady workforce, it reduces your costs in terms of recruitment and training. So it's therefore critical to try to ensure that you're meeting the needs of your employees in the future. We've seen lots of commentary coming from China recently about after Chinese New Year, how many workers don't return to the factory that they left, and how this really disrupts supply of product after Chinese New Year. So these are real factors that businesses are seeing. There is no shortage of employment in China currently, and therefore employees have more choices, and it's really critical that businesses understand this issue. If we move on to the next slide and look at actually from a product perspective, not understanding how and where your product is made can result in quality issues. Corners are being cut, and the cost of recalling a product and all that means can run into millions of pounds for a business. These are serious issues that businesses want to avoid. If we also look at the impact of legislation, then legislation certainly appears to be increasing. Across the globe, you will have different legislation being enacted. And what that means now for global businesses is that they're having to comply with different legislation in different countries where their product is either manufactured or sold. So you have here in the UK, for example, the Bribery Act, which means that companies have to show what they are doing to prevent bribery taking place in their supply chain. Now that can be a near on impossible task if you don't even know who is in your supply chain, and that's why it's really critical to understand who you are purchasing from. And supply chains are complex. They are multi-layered. They're often down to tier 3, 4, 5. So it's very important to understand the complexity of your supply chain and who is in it. You also have things like the Californian Transparency Act, which impacts on supply chains, and again requires companies to show due diligence in their sourcing practices. And recently the implementation of the Dodd-Frank Act, which talks about conflict minerals, but when you look at the products that impacts, it's huge. So from zippers on jeans to buttons on jackets to components in phones, etc. It's a very, very broad range, and it's really important that companies keep up to date with the requirements of legislation. Looking also at investors, increasingly understanding the investment community are increasingly understanding the benefits of responsible sourcing for programs. Historically, responsible sourcing was often the domain of the corporate responsibility department within an organization. Now what you're finding is it is moving much more central to an organization's key strategy and key operations. And now responsible sourcing is part of the remit of the procurement director, the supply chain director. It's not just in a niche department any longer. And that means that it's getting greater focus. But also it means that if companies can demonstrate that they are responsible in their sourcing practices, it improves certainly their rankings in things like Dow Jones Sustainability Index or the FTSE for Good Index. But it also gives access to investment or can reduce the borrowing costs for companies. So it is a real opportunity for business. And then I guess finally it is the moral imperative. So I've talked through lots of business reasons why it makes good sense to understand your supply chain and manage your supply chain responsibly. But actually, fundamentally, it is the right thing to do. Companies and individuals just cannot prosper on the back of others' misery. Child labour and forced labour is wrong. You do not want to be part of that, and you don't have to be.
I have a question here from Anita. She asks, what is the evidence that reputational risks affect the bottom line? She says, I know this has happened too, and she lists a couple of companies. I don't want to put their names out in the public domain, but she says that they never suffered a fall in sales after, shall we say, big public fallouts from these supply chain issues. So what is the evidence that reputational risks affect the bottom line?
Hi, Anita. I think it is a really difficult one, and I guess we probably are all mindful of maybe the company that you might be mentioning. I think it is. There are differences really. You have seen companies who haven't been impacted, and I think that is not necessarily a sustainable position in the long term. But you've also seen very directly companies that are impacted. I think there is a figure, and Anita, I might have to share this with you offline because I don't have it to hand, but there is a figure that shows from the investment community that they've created themselves, not from an organisation such as ourselves, which shows the value they put on a company and how they do add value. So I think there is direct factual evidence out there, and I'm happy to share that through CBBC after this presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I mean,
sorry,
yep.
Sorry, just I think, yeah, so if I just cover that one off, it's after this one.
Okay.
Sorry. So moving on to the next slide. The largest risks for organizations are in their supply chain. Really, and it is this, I mean, this iceberg kind of demonstrates it. Often companies will know who are in their first tier. So they'll know their biggest suppliers. And the risk often isn't in those first tier companies. It is way down the process. So there will have been stories that many of you will have seen last year talking about retailers and sweatshop standards in their production of clothing items here actually in the UK. And those companies didn't know that those manufacturers were making the product. It had been outsourced further down the supply chain, and that's where the real risk lies, and that's the challenge for business, because it's very complex to understand who is in your supply chain, no matter what regulations you put in place and what your contractual agreements say. So the key challenge is really, how do you engage suppliers? That can be a challenge, but there's certainly ways around it, and the Sedex kind of approach is very much moving from a compliance mentality to one of commitment. The answer and the real solutions to some of these challenges will be met by the suppliers, not by organisations just asking them to do things. So it's really important that the supplier understands the benefit to their business directly of having better standards within their production facility. And that's what Sedex really does. We aim to engage directly with the supplier. So we have a survey now. If you could participate in that one, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, our next poll is, I'm going to launch it right now. It should be coming up on your screens. Hopefully you can see it now. Yeah, so what is the biggest risk in your supply chain? So again, just to get an idea of where everybody is on this, if you could just choose what are your biggest risks. We'll give everyone a few seconds. While we're doing that, I have a question here from Noor. He asks, does the Chinese government have a certification process for responsible suppliers?
Hi, Noor. No, it's certainly not that I'm aware of. There are many certification systems out there. So whether it's product specific, so for example, if you are operating in the toy industry, there is something called ICTI, ICTI, and many of the retailers will require ICTI certification if you're providing them with toys. There are certification systems like WRAP, Worldwide Responsible Sourcing Program. So there are many different certification programs out there that are often product specific. Also, it's probably worth sharing that Sedex itself is not a certification body. We don't say that a site is operating to a certain standard, and there's lots of reasons for that. It can be very complicated to actually provide real assurance, and I think there's some challenges around how you do that. And the best, I mean, there are some great certification systems out there, but like I say, they tend to be product related rather than organization related. I think it's very difficult to certify an organization, but you can understand how committed an organization is to responsible practices by asking certain questions of them. And again, that's part of what the Sedex process does.
Terrific. Okay, well, we have the poll results in here, so we can. I think we've launched them with everybody. So 39% of people, their concerns are labour standards, 21% health and safety, 9% corruption, bribery, 15% quality, and 15% other. Carmel, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, and probably mirrors exactly what the Sedex data would show. So Sedex looks at 4 key areas, which is labour standards, health and safety, environment, and business ethics, which is kind of the governance, corruption, bribery piece. Every year we publish an annual review, and in that review we talk about the most common issues seen globally and then also specifically in certain countries. The most common issues tend to be pretty regularly around labour standards, so things like young workers in supply chain, poor wages, just general poor standards. So labour standards is certainly, I would agree, the highest area for activity.
All right, thanks for that. Right, well, let's move on. I think we've moved on from the tip of the iceberg, and we'll go on to the next slide. So
Great.
Just a little bit about your own organisation, Sedex. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll spend just a few slides talking about Sedex in a little more detail. Sedex was established in 2004. And we operate as a membership organisation. We're a not-for-profit organisation, so therefore we're actually owned by our member companies. So when companies work with Sedex, they join the organisation and they effectively own the organisation. Sedex was founded, like I say, back in 2004 with two clear objectives, and they were to reduce duplication for suppliers. So suppliers are at the core of what Sedex does. So the company was formed when some retailers and the large manufacturers came together, really on the back of some of the media stories that were impacting in the 90s around companies such as Levi, etc. So they recognised that there was a need for greater information and greater transparency through the supply chain, but they recognised that they were placing a large burden on suppliers because they were all asking similar questions but doing it individually. So Sedex was created to enable that data to be collected, but in one format that could be shared, thereby reducing costs and also reducing the resource impact for suppliers. The other key objective of the organisation was to drive collaboration, and over my next few slides I will talk about the scale and size of Sedex, but it's really important that we take action together. It generally is more effective if you have many companies focusing on the same area. And like the previous poll showed us, 39% of you are concerned about labour standards. If we're all working together, we've got more chance of actually addressing some of those issues than doing it individually. So around these two objectives of reducing duplication and driving collaboration, we aim to improve the lives of millions of workers worldwide and also protect the environment. So we are an online tool that enables the management of supply chain risk, and we also provide a range of services that support that. We are here to drive transparency through the supply chain, enable those improvements that issues that are identified to enable improvements around those areas, drive collaboration, reduce duplication, and also share supply chain and sustainability expertise. And that's really critical from a membership organisation. So we talked about global expertise. Sedex is the largest organisation of its kind in the world. If we just look at this slide, the top left-hand box talks about the Sedex team. So we have 3 global offices. We're headquartered here in London, but we have our office in Shanghai, which has been operational since 2007 with the help of CBBC. So our team, we have a global call centres. The system itself is used in more than 150 countries, so it's really important that the teams are multilingual, the system is multilingual. So that's pretty critical. As well as so we have office in Shanghai, office in London, and we have an office in New York. We also now have a global office just opening in Chile, covering Latin America. If we look at the right-hand side, top right-hand side box, and we just look at the presence of Sedex globally, we have now more than 28,000 supplier organisations operating in 150 different countries. We have 500, slightly more than 500 now, of some of the world's best-known, loved, recognised brands, and about 50,000 users of the system worldwide. The system itself has about 70,000 audits, with 10,000 new audits being added every year. The really important thing, though, again, looking at the real benefits of Sedex if you're a supplier, is that although our membership grows at double-digit levels every year, the amount of actually audits that are being requested is reducing, and that's because audits can now be shared across the system. So this sharing of data is actually delivering real cost savings and efficiency savings for companies. We work very closely also.
Sorry about the noise. This is our office weekly alarm. It will go off in about 3 seconds, but hopefully it'll wake you all up if you're feeling a bit sleepy at your desk. And it's gone.
So so we work also very closely with key stakeholders around the world, and that's very important for our companies who are members. So, for example, we're the only company of its kind to be non-business signatories for the UN Global Compact, and we work very closely with that organisation. So, moving on, where does Sedex actually fit within organisations? So, this slide, if you look at the kind of arrows in the middle which show the brand, the CSR policy and the code of conduct, that's generally the purchasing organisation. So that's your company, if you like. And if we look to the left of that, you have reporting requirements, whether they could be internal reporting, but they could also be external reporting to investors, to government, to your consumers, and also the media. And that can be quite a complex process. So Sedex comes in the internal side of that, enabling you to manage and measure some of those you know, the impact of your CSR policy, the impact of your code of conduct, etc. The Sedex system itself is flexible. So Sedex is not a standard. We're not a certification body. It enables companies purely to manage and measure their own programs. It helps streamline the collection of supplier data and also enables you to measure your supply chain. So just the next slide very quickly. We're very proud of our membership, and this really just highlights some of the members in the organisation. So moving on then to China specifically. China is a huge area, a huge country of an important country for Sedex and our member organisations. Sedex itself has about 28,000 members that I mentioned before. 20% of our entire membership is based in China. It is a really critical sourcing country, but it is a changing country. So the expectations of workers, of young people in China is changing from previous generations. We've seen recently things like the annual salary increase, you know, which is a commitment over 5 years, driving the cost of production up. So there's lots of challenges within that environment, but it will, I'm sure, remain a critical sourcing country. So I'd like to hand over now to my colleague Walter, who is actually based in our Shanghai office, who will take us through the next few slides, which look at some specific data on Sedex.
Walter, are you out there?
Yes, I'm here, so everyone can hear me. Okay.
Go for it, Walter.
So,
you're live.
okay. So my name is Walter. I'm working for Sedex in Shanghai office in here. So for Sedex, as mentioned, is an online tool regarding about the social compliance or ethical trade. So you might see the slide in here. We have listed out the top 5 industries in China. That will be the clothing, that is the apparel and garments, which occupy almost about 40% of our total numbers of industries in China, and followed by luggages and fabrics and footwear and toy and games in the mainland China. So as you know, China is always important for the exporting business for clothing, luggage, personal care, and toy and games. So Sedex is an online tool which we can collect the supply information to refresh what will be the key industry and the key issues in China. So if we look at the next slide.
Survey.
I think we're going to drop in a poll now, Walter, actually. We're going to drop in
Oh, sure, no problem.
We're going to drop in a quick poll just to get people's China position. So do you source from China? Quick question. While we're waiting, as I say, please feel free to type in your questions. If you have any particular things you'd like to ask either Carmel or Walter as we go along. We have a few in. We'll save them to the end if we don't get to them right now, and we'll follow up afterwards if we don't get to them in this session. So we're nearly done here, just another couple of seconds. So just to understand the group that we have, I'll close that poll and I shall share with the group. So 22% yes, and we are happy with our suppliers. 31% yes, but we have had problems with the suppliers. 9% no, but we may in the near future. 16% no, and 22% other. I'm fascinated by our others today.
Again, I think a really interesting responses. Like I say, China is a huge supply source of supply for many companies. Sorry, and I think it's you would assume that there are always problems in supply chain. So I think that's a really good reflection of the realities.
All right, back over to you, Walter.
Okay, so if you look at the next slide, from the Sedex system is able, you can see that we have two graphic here. One is top 10 audit non-compliance categories in China, another is a global. So as you can see that from the global and China, the fire safety is always the top priority and the top key issues no matter in China or in other Asia countries. But obviously in China, the overtime hours, it's like very key issues, and this is occupied the second. And the machinery, chemical, and environment, it's widely happened in most chemical industry, apparel industry, and some heavy equipment industries in mainland of China. However, if you look at the global, you might have another question. For example, like health and safety could occupy the second as ranking a second top non-compliance in a global view. In China, you can also, we have similar questions related to like a benefit like social insurance, or whether you enjoying the like annual leave or sick leave according to the regulation and law in China. And also we had a problem with the minimum wage in different provinces and in different industries. So in the next slide, we will discussion
Walter,
in more
I have a question here from Toby
about the key issues in China.
I have a question here from Toby.
Okay.
Toby asks, what is, and it's connected with some of the issues on the slide here, what is the current Chinese government position on a single system of social security payments, especially for migrant workers? Any thoughts on that?
Well, right now it's the Chinese government. They have a single security system, insurance system for all the mainland Chinese people. However, the facility, I mean, for example, I am the people who locate in Beijing. However, but my hometown is not in Beijing, so the government have the regulation and the policy to say it's okay to allow the different city or different province, they can transfer the social insurance. But in fact, it's really difficult to operate in some second line or third line cities. It takes time. So right now, since last year, like Shanghai or Guangzhou or Beijing, these big cities is able to transfer to make sure the whole nation have a one central and unit security system, which people can transfer their insurance or medical insurance, something like that. But for the small outskirts areas, it takes time. So I think in the coming 3 or 5 years, the whole nation will be able to focusing on have a central and unit security or insurance system to enable people can working in different city, but enable to join the same single requirement from the government.
Okay, thanks, Walter. I've moved the slide on for you.
Okay, so we mainly talk about first look at the working hours. So the Chinese law is saying 14 hours per week, daily to maximum overtime is 3 hours, but monthly, which cannot go beyond 36 hours overtime, and at least 1 rest day per week. But there are some key issues in China. Is like some local supply is especially those who are small and medium-sized export business supply who are not be able to meet those requirements because they would like to get business. For example, if like the Christmas time is coming, the peak season, they should working longer time to meet the requirement from their international customers. And also the supply also need to working on overtime to meet the short-term delivery time to reduce the inventory costs from their customer. So this is one of the key reasons is the customer orders is coming very quickly or it's go beyond the capacity, and this is will bring the factory to working more time to make sure they meet the requirement from the customer. So that will be go beyond the regulation or go beyond the local law. Another issue that will be local supply. They might have different working hours limitation on themselves because one supply in China, they have different customers from UK, from Australia, or from the US. So these different customers, they might have the different requirement or standard on working hours. So some customers, they will say maximum working hour is 52 per week, but some will say we are allowing 60, and some even more. So it's very hard for the supply to balance which one is the best working hour they can follow on. So this is a very, very big problem for those exporting business supplier. They are quite struggle on the different requirements putting on their working hour systems. And also, furthermore, many factories, they won't be able to, the owners, they won't be able to pay for the overtime salaries because this is also a very key issue in China. And in some cases, however, in some cases, some factory workers, they prefer to work in a more longer time because they would like to get more money. Because the money, for example, their monthly salary, let's say, is £200. But if they can working more hours, they can get a working salary for the premiums. That means they can got more cash. Then they can earn they can support their living. So this is also a lot of factory. They provide the supplier, provide the workers who can working for longer hours to get a more salary. However, for some factories, they persuade the supplier to working more longer hours. However, they did not offer the overtime salaries. So there are two different situations in China currently. So this is the major issues for working hours. For wages, I think there are minimum wages in each province in China, and there are some factories seems not be able to provide a minimum wage. So there is a regulation, a law in China to say overtime salary if you for working day is 150% of the normal salary range, and if working for weekends that will be 200%, and holidays should be 300%. But it seems that a lot of the factory owners or a lot of suppliers, they do not follow this regulation to pay the premiums for the supplier or for the people who are working in the office. So these are very key issues in China as well. And third point, we can see that workers, they don't understand how the salary is calculated. Normally, especially for some apparel garments supply, they just give out the supplier the total money, what they need to get each month, and there is no any clear to define how many tax they need to pay, what kinds of deduction from the normal salary. So it's very confusing, and workers have no idea how they get the money and how the salary is calculated. And the fourth would be for the piece rate salaries, which the higher high price rate standard is set up, and it's hard for workers to get the relevant rate piece salaries. This is also a very important serious issues in the piece rate manufacturing side. And the final one will be illegal deduction of salary, because sometimes the workers, they are living into the hotel, living into the automation which provides by the factory owner. However, the factory owner will normally deduct the more monies to cover they can offer to stay into the automation. For example, the normal daily let's say the supplier, the workers monthly is 1,000 Chinese yuan per month, but the factories will automatically to deduct, let's say 400 or 300 to tell the supplier this is for your living fees which stay in our factories automations. So which is unfair and which also is illegal deductions from the law of the Chinese regulation. And coming back to the social insurance and benefits, so there are total 5 in China. One is work injuries, pension insurance, medical insurance, and employment insurance. So the regulation will be different among each province, so which is very, very hard to manage at this stage, but it will be better and better. But some suppliers, they did not buy the insurance for workers, but some did. The real situation is that a lot of the, I think in 2 or 3 years ago, the whole nation which not be able to transfer your national insurance from one province to another. So that means a lot of workers, they don't would like to pay for the insurance, because if they're working in Beijing, but when they return back to Shanghai, they not be able to get the social insurance, or they not be able to get the pension insurance. So they are feel reluctant to pay or ask the factory owner to pay for them to handing the money for the pension or social insurance. But what Toby mentioned just now, with the development of the national one single and integrated social insurance program, we hope in the coming future the workers will be happy to ask the owner to pay for their social insurance, because even they return back to their hometown, they still can enjoy the social insurance after their retirement. And the third point will be the social insurance cannot be transferred from one place to another. So this is what I mentioned, which is also the reason why workers prefer to get money rather than they pay for the money to get a social insurance. Also, because in China there are some provinces, especially like the east coast of the China, like Shanghai or like Guangzhou, these more developed areas, which the social insurance payment basis is much more higher because the local salary minimum wage is higher. But in some outskirt areas like Sichuan or some Hubei province, because their monthly salary is very low, and the social insurance or pension was based on the basic salary range. So that means the people, they won't get enough. For example, if I pay 10% of my salary, which is like 10,000 Chinese yuan in Shanghai. But if I go back to my hometown, my minimum wage only got about 2,000 Chinese yuan. So that means they're enjoying that social insurance if they are working for two different cities. So this is also the key issues in China currently. It's unbalanced economic development status in different parts of China. And regarding the annual leave and sick leave, it's very hard to promote in each supplier because many of them do not enjoy the relevant like sick leave or annual leave. I think for the manufacturing side, who is very big, like national companies or very big supplier, they might be able to offer such kinds of the annual leave. But for very, very small or like export business supplier, due to the peak season of the production, they might be able to offer any annual leave facilities or any opportunity for supplier to enjoy the annual leave or sick leave. So this is the key issues in China about the annual leave. And migrant workers and migrant laborers worker, they are normally for very low pay and often under very bad conditions. So they are working in factories, at construction sites, in mines or in railroads, or they are working in the restaurants. So the key problem is they might not to get the normal pay or not even get a social insurance in some cities because some local governments do not supposed to do that. But it seems right now, especially like Shanghai, they are encourage the every people who working in Shanghai, even you are a waiter or waitress, or even you are a people who doing the like cleaning men or cleaning women, you still need to be employers still have the responsibility to pay for the minimized social insurance. So I hope this will be getting better in the coming future. And also this is refer a bit about the transformation of the social insurance because even some people working in Shanghai, they enjoy the social insurance, but after they go back to their hometown, it's hard for them to enjoy the social insurance because it's very hard to transfer the social insurance among cities currently. And the third question will be, the problem will be education of their children. So it's very hard to get school and how to balance, for example, if I'm the people from Shanghai and then come to Beijing for working. So how can I make sure my children can get a very good education? And does the local government have any facility or system to support the education for their children in the working cities? And this is, I think this is a very big questions for many like migrant workers. If they have children, they need to bring them to different cities. And moving to one side to another, which making the supply, it's very, how to say, because since last year in South China, like Guangdong province, it's really difficult to getting the people because the labor cost is getting increasing higher and higher. So a lot of the workers, they now return back to their hometown because even in Sichuan or even in some outskirts areas, they are be able to offer the same salaries compared to what it was in the south of China. So that means the money on that salary is not so attractive to those migrant workers previously. So now they prefer to go back home. And now a lot of like international business like Foxconn, even they open a lot of new facilities or factories in outskirts of China, like Sichuan or Hubei provinces, which enable to provide more employment opportunities for local people. So the people prefer to stay rather than moving to bigger cities to looking for more opportunities. And the final point regarding the culture, I think this is not quite related to culture, is I would like to share to say how the workers, they are changing, generation change. For example, in 10 or 20 years ago, the people who was born in 1960 or 70, even in 1980s, their main purpose to working in the big city, they just would like to earn more money to survive, to send the money back to their hometown, to support for their children, to support for their family. But now, the people or the workers who was born in 1990s or 20s, now is gradually to going to the factories to looking for a job. But these people are now different from their parents because they feel that money is not the priority. They would like to enjoy the same lifestyles with the people in the city. So they prefer, okay, I would like to get an iPhone, I would like to get very good clothing, and I would like to nice food. So their whole attitude of the culture of the new generation is now changing. They would like to enjoy more about their life and then enjoy more about communication with the people. So that's the reason it's hard for the supplier, especially the factory owners, to managing these young people, especially from the human resource point of view. It's hard to control and managing these young generation. And at the same time, the factory, it will be very difficult to get these young people, because the factory, in the young people's point of view, it's very dirty, or it's very Thai work, or it's very like to earn more money. So they prefer to stay into restaurant, or even they go to be the waiters, because they fear they are quite interaction with the city life rather than the factory life. So I think these are two of the points. Manufacturing, they cannot got the people, or if you got the people with this young generation, it's very hard to managing and keep these young people to working for the factory for a long time. So this is making the turnover will be very high, and which leading the factory cannot get any very good resource of the human resources to support for the production or support for the warehousing or something like that. So I think this is my feeling and my discussion with my colleague here to share with everyone here. So now I think we'll go back to Carmel to talk about how we can overcoming the challenges in here.
Great, thank you very much, Walter. I think that was really interesting to hear a great insight from someone who's actually based in mainland China. So how do we we've spent some time looking at some of the issues and challenges. How do we overcome those? So I think it's really important to understand the realities of operating in different countries, but specifically today looking at mainland China. I think the first question is how do you define good and bad? It's a very subjective perspective, really, and I think the basis is to start on what is the legal requirements, and I think that's really helpful. And there are organisations such as the ILO, the International Labour Organization. Here in the UK, some of you will have heard of ETI, the Ethical Trade Initiative, and ETI has created a code which is based on the ILO, so the International Labour Organization standards, that set out certain things. And that helps you, I think, to understand what are the basic requirements and how do you start to understand good performance versus bad performance. It is also really important to understand the cultural environment in which you are operating. And I guess this goes to the point of helping suppliers understand the benefits of some of your requests as a purchasing organization. We need to be mindful that it is just a different operating. China is still a developing country in comparison with many of the countries such as the UK or other countries in mainland Europe or Northern America. So it is different, and we need to understand that this is a program that's going to take some time and therefore need some commitment. Supply chains are big and complex, so we've talked about this before at some length, but they're multi-tiered, they're multi-layered. You don't always know who is actually producing the product. You think you do, but that may not be the case. They change frequently. Again, depending on the sort of product you're purchasing, they can be very transactional relationships. And a transactional relationship means that it's quite difficult to build improvements in your supply chain, because actually you may source from them once and never go back to them again, or it may be that you're sourcing at just one part of the year. So that can make it quite difficult for suppliers to understand the benefit of making some adjustments to their ways of operating. Trust is a big issue, and in areas such as China, in India, Bangladesh, we are seeing audit fraud being a huge challenge for business. And that's why, although audit is I think still a very vital tool, it is only one part of any responsible sourcing program. It is if you set out a mentality which is pass or fail, then the supplier basically will do whatever they can to ensure that they pass an audit. And paying bribes to auditors to give them a clean audit report to make the situation look better than is reality is a real challenge, a present challenge when you are sourcing from China. What it requires really is the buyer, whoever is reading that audit report, to understand the environment in which that factory is operating. If you are purchasing a highly seasonal item and they're operating at the peak supply time, it is really unlikely that they won't have overtime issues. You know, it's just a fact. What you need to do is have a conversation with the factory to understand how they can minimize that impact, but also how they can flatten that across the year. So just because the audit report says that they're maybe not doing these things, I think you need to, you have a a responsibility as a purchasing organization to question some of that. It can be expensive to make some of these improvements in supply chain. You know, Walter was talking about the issues of paying overtime salaries, etc. Sometimes the margins just aren't there, and making those investments can seem to be a big step for organizations. And that's why it's better if you can have a long-term relationship with your supplier rather than a transactional one. But fundamentally, knee-jerk reactions have the worst effect. So if, for instance, child labour is found, just stopping supply, removing that contract from that organization can sometimes have a far more negative impact on the workers and on the children that you're trying to protect. So it's really important to see, have a longer term view about this and ensure that you're not making knee-jerk reactions. And I think we need to be aware of reducing buying power from Western companies now. China has an emerging middle class, it has an emerging domestic market, and therefore I'm hearing a lot from our companies who are purchasing from China, where if they are, if they're not helping the company understand the benefits of making improvements, they're just saying your business isn't worth it. We have better opportunities from companies who don't require such standards to be maintained. So again, working in a collaborative way helps. So if you are part of a group that is working to the same standard, a same requirement, that helps, because one thing that we do see in Sedex is a huge crossover in supply chain. So if we're looking at, say, consumer goods, there's probably a 30 to 40% crossover supply chain, which means on average, every supplier on Sedex is sharing their information with at least 3 or 4 of their customers. And that means those 3 or 4 customers all have the same expectations, which makes it much easier for the supplier to improve because they're doing it for multiples of their customers. But those are some of the realities that we need to be aware of. Looking at the next slide, I've kind of touched on this already, but it's important not to have a pass-or-fail mentality. It just won't get you the outcomes, the positive outcomes that you're looking for. Knowing who is in your supply chain is key. Risk assessing your suppliers is absolutely fundamental, and that allows you to focus on your highest risks. There's no point really, it's a distraction. If you have maybe anything from 10 to 1,000 to 100,000 suppliers in your supply chain, asking them all or taking the same approach with all of them means that you can't really focus on the areas that are most important. So tools like Sedex enable you to risk assess your supply chain and focus on the highest risks and take a long-term view. But it's, like I say, audit is only one part of a responsible sourcing program. Spend time, visit your suppliers, look at credible certification systems like Fairtrade, Rainforest Alliance. There's many, many others out there. Look at training and education. Many of you will have heard this term, and it's growing in awareness of capacity building, supplier engagement, capability building. They're all about moving beyond kind of just the audit pass and fail mentality into really understanding what the issues are at your supplier. Why are they tackling issues of high worker turnover or failing to meet minimum standards on wages? What's driving that? Do you have a part to play in that? Can you help them? There's not many companies who truly get up in the morning with the intent of doing bad things, but sometimes it's just lack of knowing what is expected and how to make some simple steps. So it's really, really critical that you work with your suppliers. We now have one just last survey that I'd be really grateful if you just take a minute to look at. And this one will look at what are the biggest challenges you are looking to manage within your supply chains. So I think it's up on the screen now.
It is now, yep. Please click on whatever is the most relevant for you. Just another couple of seconds there, please. Please click on whichever of the categories is most relevant to your area of work, your biggest challenges in managing standards in your supply chain. We'll just give it another couple of seconds.
Great. Well, I suppose that completely reinforces, I think David will show the results on your screen now, but 40% of you are saying that it's actually engaging and working with your suppliers, and completely agree. That is what we hear from most companies that we work with, both from the purchasing company but also from the supplier. Kind of there's a disconnect with suppliers not really knowing what it is their customers are asking for and why they're asking for it, and I think that's the really important thing. And there's also the complexity for purchasing organisations in understanding who is in their supply chain. So really important to get that visibility. So my moving on to kind of towards the end of my slides, opportunities. There are many opportunities. China is a huge country, I said, for sourcing. And that's not going to change. So let's look at what we can do. Shared suppliers, like I spoke of. On a system like Sedex, you will have a huge crossover. 30 or 40% of suppliers from a typical company, their suppliers will already be on the system. So you're getting transparency, you're sharing your suppliers, which is helping you have a stronger voice with their suppliers. You're also learning. We're learning all the time. We're learning from companies who've done things in China, and those programs haven't worked, or those programs have worked. And I think that really helps when potentially you're looking at perhaps negative criticism from the media or from NGOs, looking at actually, you're not a single company. These issues, as Walter showed, the issues of fire safety, etc., are not just specific to your individual company. They are shared by global companies. So actually, if we can show there are some endemic issues, but organizations are taking action, taking responsibility, that really helps. Working with companies, getting a greater understanding of the issues, getting a greater understanding of the actual country where you're purchasing from. So again, I'd encourage you all to spend time there. Increasing the business case, so that goes to kind of getting your business to move responsible sourcing to be more of a central strategy rather than something that's in the kind of CSR department. Meeting, obviously, legislation. You have a requirement, obviously, to meet legislation, but it's an opportunity for companies to reduce the amount of legislation if they take ownership of these issues. If they're seen to be driving for responsible supply chains, that can reduce the threat of increased legislation. And as I talked about very early on, there is increasing public pressure, and that's not going to change. And to the whole point that companies no longer are in control of how their messages are distributed amongst the public. Workers have smartphones, we have social media. It's very, very easy now to get stories or negative stories out to large amounts of people very quickly. So looking at the future, actually, Walter, I'm going to hand back to you just to talk us through this kind of penultimate slide, which is on key trends for China and the globe. Next slide, sorry, David.
Yeah. Over to you, Walter.
Okay, so I think I will talk about a little bit more about in China in here. So we already been working with a lot of our brands and retailers members in China. So previously they would do a lot about social audits, ask the third party like SGS or Intertech to go to the supplier side to visit and conduct some social audit reports. But now it seems that this will create a lot of duplication and a lot of trouble, duplication for the supplier. So we found that a lot of our brand and the retailers, customers already, they provide some alternative to social audit, for example, like worker hotlines. So they are working with a lot of China-based NGOs. They can provide the worker hotlines, which the workers who working in a supplier's factory can report for any critical ethical issues to these third-party worker hotlines, which they can reflect back to the buying company or the the brands of retailers. And also in China, we seeing that a lot of food industry like Nestle or Unilever, whatever, they are China team now working together to do some combination projects to helping their supplier to making improvement For example, we have been working with some food industry customers. They have a lot of shared suppliers in central of China who making the sugar or chemical or packaging supplier. So they might have the similar issue with the health and safety. So they hold a regular workshop or training to provide these training opportunities for their supply in China to have a better understanding the requirement about the social audit, about the ethical requirement. So that means this is the supplier, they will see a great combination efforts from their customer to push to making improvements on their supply chain. And within these years, a lot of greater lowers of local NGOs and trade unions or associations like China Textile Association, they are already been working with a lot of local China-based brands. They are working with a lot of only social compliance program. So that means the social compliance is not only the requirement or the social responsibility. It's not a requirement from the international customer or retailers, but also the local brands and consumers. They still have a gradually to feel that it's important of their long-term business developments. So we are also working with a lot of local NGO to helping to understand what will be the local issues and how we can revert back to these local issues, back to the international customer, to making the whole supply chain to have a better improvements. Regarding about the social compliance or ethical trade, I think in about 10 or 15 years ago, everyone is talking about toy industry, apparel industry. But now we can see that in these recent years, a lot of international customers, a lot of domestic customers is now looking to promote the social compliance or ethical trade to more new sector spaces like FMCG industries and pharmaceuticals and jewelries, and a lot of national local brands. It's also now working together to looking how they can working together to making an improvement of the real situation in China about the social compliance or the ethical trade. And finally, I would like to share to say since last 2 years in the 2010 in Beijing, now a lot of the local NGOs now will be set up, and they are now trying to go out to talking with a lot of media to pay attention to the local issues. For example, like IPE, it's about environment NGO. Now it's looking to see the whole apparel industry in China and the pollutions in China. And also we also see some media to talking about some food industry NGO. Now it's talking with a lot of the first-tier manufacturers in China to understand how they managing their social compliance program, how their recruitment for whether they use the child labor or whether they pay the local insurance. And the media now it's widely to pay attention to raise the consumer, the awareness about the social compliance, about the consumer ethical behaviors. So this now will be becoming more important and important for people in China and here. So I think that's the mainly chance in China. So I think that's my part about the China key chance. So I will revert back to Carmel to talk about the global one.
Great, and I think I've probably talked quite at some length to the global one, and I'm conscious of everyone's time this morning. But just to highlight some of these things, audits are still very common, but there is a range now. They're one part of the tool, and it's really important that you risk assess. We are, as Walter talked about, multiple sectors, so it's not just now focusing on traditional ones such as food and clothing, but looking into heavy engineering, into transport, into very new sectors, construction. So it's crossing over into multiple sectors. It's not just equally. It's not just traditional places that we've seen as high risk. We see risk right across the world. So we'll have examples of very poor labour standards in UK, for example. So it's not just China that is facing some of these issues. Transparency is important. I guess the concerning thing is that some common issues are still prevalent. So highlighting really the need to collaborate on addressing some of these. So I think, and obviously, as Walter says, new and increasing pressure from stakeholders. So that pressure is not going to go away. Social media is enabling greater transparency, people to have voices that they never had before, and that's not going to go away. I think there's probably a couple of questions that have come through, David.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks very much. We'll move on to some questions. People have raised some. What I will do also is just put this page back on, so please type in your question. Have a question from Anita. Is there consumer pressure in China for labor standards to improve?
Hi, Anita. I would say it's starting. It's fundamentally the biggest concern for people. It still remains around product safety and quality. So that's still very much the focus. But there's world kind of documented figures that show that there is an increasing and there will continue to be an increasing middle class, if you like, so a more affluent group of people in China. And greater connectivity with the rest of the world means that these issues are becoming more common. And with the increasing presence of NGOs in China itself, all of these are combining to drive consumer pressure. But I would still say, it's at early stages.
Okay, I have a question here from Matt. Walter, this is for you, I think, really. You talked a lot about, workers' rights and all sorts of things. Are workers on the ground feeling more confident to maybe stand up to their employers and to demand what they should get, or do they still feel a bit intimidated and afraid to talk to the big boss and ask for these things?
And I think this is about a cultural problem because like people in China or Chinese people, it's not like some the people in other countries is more willing to speak out to their big boss. But now it's I think there are two things. One is the culture, because the Chinese people still to keep on to be the more traditional attitudes. For example, they will be not very shouting or directly to talk to their boss about their requirement. But however, for the new generation, I think they got a lot of the information from the media. They understand their right. So now there are lots of NGO. It's helping with these workers to stay together with the workers to talk to their senior. Some ways now Chinese young generation is changing with the help from the local NGO or with some of the labor governments or bureaucracies will helping these workers to be more brave to speak them out, to asking for what their rights and what they need to get from the factory owners.
Okay, thanks. I have another question here from Noor. Is physical inspection, I assume means visits to suppliers. So visiting is this a practical way to ensure compliance? What does Sedex feel about that?
Hi Noor. I think it is really important. I think it depends. So audit is, if we're looking at a physical inspection, I think there's two types of that visit. So one is you as a purchasing organization going and spending time at your supplier site, and just whether you don't have to be an experienced auditor to do that, just going and getting a feel for the thing. And I think that's really, really important. You want to know who you're doing business with. Sometimes just because of the location of the cost and whatever, it's not always possible to do that yourself. And that's when having an audit and again being able to share audits, so you're not always paying or asking the supplier to pay for an audit just for yourselves, but being able to share an audit does verify some of the information that the supplier will have told you. So through the Sedex system, the supplier will complete a self-assessment questionnaire. If you want, and that's then risk assessed, but if you want that verified, then really the only way to do that is by an audit. So yeah, I do think they have an important role to play, and I think there are definitely a practical way to understand what's actually happening at a production site.
All right, a question here from Toby. Does Sedex have a list of useful China NGOs that brands can contact?
Yes, Toby, we certainly do. I will get, I haven't got it with me, and obviously it's quite a long list, and depending on the sort of sector and sort of product that you're most interested in, but happy to get something out to you via the guys here at CBBC.
All right, great. Question from Emma. What steps does Sedex take to verify a supplier's response before deciding if an audit is required?
Hi, Emma. So, like I said, Sedex is actually a flexible system. We are not a standard, so it is the purchasing company that would decide whether an audit is required. The steps that Sedex goes, that users of the Sedex system go through is a supplier will be asked to join the system. They then complete a self-assessment questionnaire which is relevant to their type of product that they're producing, etc. That self-assessment questionnaire is checked for completeness and accuracy in terms of is the answer that they've given correct. So, in free text boxes, it has to be a proper sentence, not just gobbledygook, loads of X's and Y's, etc. So we check that for completeness. There is no way, and I think it is a real challenge, to verify data without doing an on-site visit. There are certain things that you can, that through the sharing of data you can look through. So if, for example, one of the questions on a self-assessment questionnaire is, do you have a health and safety policy, and they say yes, then we ask them to share that policy so someone can see it. You can only know if that policy is actually being implemented by doing an on-site check, really. So there's a mixture. But importantly, and to be very clear, Sedex does not verify. So we don't rate a supplier. We don't say that supplier is meeting certain standards. It is up for the customer to view that and use the tools on the system to understand, based on the inherent risks and also the way that the self-assessment questionnaire has been replied, it will rank them into high, medium or low likelihood of risks.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we're going to deal with this morning. I'm conscious again of everybody's time. So thank you very much to our speakers. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact me and I'll pass them on. So first I'd like to say thank you to Carmel and to Walter for your time for this session. We're very happy at CBBC to get this kind of information to people all over the place. So thanks. Yeah, moving on. If you do like our webinars, well, firstly, I would draw your attention to the fact that we did a webinar on due diligence and background checks in China. We did that on the 29th of November. The beauty of it is all the resources of our webinars are available online. So as you can see from this, this slide here, if you just go to our webpage, go to the drop-down of what we do, and you can see that all of our events are here, and there's one section called webinars. There you can register for upcoming sessions. We've got quite a few upcoming sessions, and also past webinars and links to their recordings. This webinar will also go up. So if you've got a colleague or a friend who really should have seen this, or you didn't catch it all yourself the first time around, we post presentations and other bits and pieces online. All right, moving along. Upcoming events in the UK. Just to give you a bit of a flavor of what we are doing as an organization, we're busy and active. We have a couple of different events. On the 4th of Feb, we have a visit from a delegation from Shanghai MOFCOM. We have a dinner with Mr. Jin Li Chun on the 5th. That's premium members only. Our next webinar is part of our first series. So we're doing an IP series in China. And the first one of those is on trademark squatting and bad faith applications, which we think is a pretty serious issue for people doing business with China at the moment, particularly brands, and particularly those brands who haven't gone there yet. They're the ones most at risk, the guys who don't realize that people have already registered their trademarks. So we're trying to get that message out there across the business community here. Also different things, if you look on the 12th there, a CBBC Business Clinic. This is where we open our doors. If you just want to come in and talk to any one of our experts for half an hour, just come in, you can book their time and they'll happy to be to support you. Following on from our China expert on the desktop, our next webinar in February is contracts and contract negotiations in China. So another kind of bread and butter, basic, cold-face topic that we want people to learn more about. It's our goal on this platform to give operational information to attendees. And then the second one of our webinar series on IP, which will be IP and technology transfer. And March 14th, I have to draw all of your attention to, we have the China Business Conference 2013, which will be held in the QE2 Centre in Westminster. Registrations are open for that now. It will be a full-day event, I think pretty unmissable for those people with an interest in doing business with China. All right, so that's pretty much it. If you have any feedback, any questions, anything that we didn't get to today, please feel free to contact me. And I will pass your details on to Carmel and Walter, or reply if it's just myself. So from everybody here, thank you very much for your time this morning. I wish you good business and a great day. So thank you and goodbye.